I got 1 minute to get started, so let's get going. I'd love to have a hammer right now, Joe. If you guys could take your conversations outside so we could get started, please. Thank you. Lunch is soon. We need to get moving. Okay, you've all been provided an agenda. Is there any adjustments to the agenda? Seeing none, we'll consider those approved. Also, proceedings from the May 2013 meeting. Seeing no objections or changes to that or edits, we'll consider them approved. No one signed up for public comment. If anyone has anything to speak about Sturgeon that's not on the agenda, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I will turn it over to Katie, and we'll talk about the terms of reference for the benchmark stock assessment. Katie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So basically, as a reminder, Sturgeon will be going through an external peer review process rather than through the CDAR or the SARC process, so there's some latitude in how we develop our terms of reference for this assessment, and the technical committee and the stock assessment subcommittee develop these terms of reference based off of ASMFC's generic terms of reference, which means that we have one set of TORs for the assessment and one set of TORs for the review. So one set is to help guide the TC and the stock assessment subcommittee in completing the assessment in terms of making sure we cover everything that we want to cover, and then the other set is to sort of guide the peer review panel and make sure that we get feedback on everything that we want to get feedback on. So I'm going to go through this first with the assessment terms of reference and then just breeze extremely fast through the peer review ones because they're very similar. We started out with an objective statement this time. So basically the objectives of this assessment are to gather the best available data on Atlantic sturgeon in order to develop meaningful biological reference points and assess the status of the stock against those reference points at a scale that is most appropriate to the biology and the management of the species. So this is just to sort of help frame where we intend to go with this assessment, given that we're working with a lot of people on the TC and the stock assessment subcommittee who do not always who have not been involved in sort of the traditional assessment process before. So for the stock assessment terms of reference, number one, we're going to define the population structure based on available genetic and tagging data. And if we do use multiple alternative population structures, such as looking at it at the DPS level and or the coastwide level or the river system level, that we justify the use of each population structure. Number two is to characterize the precision and reliability of the fishery-dependent and independent data, including tagging data, used in the assessment. And this includes things like providing descriptions of the data sources, the methods used to collect these data and to standardize them, the methods and the used to assess uncertainty and how we're measuring that uncertainty, as well as discussing kind of the trends and whether or not we include them and how we justify that inclusion or elimination, as well as discussing the data strengths and the data weaknesses on the model inputs and outputs. Number three is to develop biological reference points for Atlantic sturgeon populations. Number four is to review existing estimates of Atlantic sturgeon bycatch, both retained and discarded, and if possible, develop a time series of bycatch in our monitored fisheries and discuss the assumptions and applicability of these estimates to the reference points. Number five is to, if possible, develop models to estimate population parameters such as F or Z, biomass, abundance, and analyze model performance and stability. Number six, state assumptions made for models and for calculations of indices and other statistics, and explain how these assumptions and or the assumption violations are going to affect the model input and output. Number 7 is, where possible, assess stock status based on biological characteristics, including but not limited to trends in age or size structure and trends in temporal indicators of abundance. Characterize the uncertainty of model estimates and the reference points. And recommend stock status as related to reference points. For example, is the stock above or below our biomass threshold? Is the mortality above or below the mortality threshold? And is the index, if we're using an index-based assessment, above or below a reference value? We also wanted to sort of include something on other potential scientific issues, such as sort of comparing our model outputs with what we think the best available information is on the life history of the population, and trying to make sure that those line up with what we think the population is doing. And then 11 and 12 are just develop research recommendations and recommend the timing of the next benchmark assessment and intermediate updates if necessary. So that's the terms of reference for the stock assessment, and I am going to blow through the peer review terms of reference, because they are basically just evaluate the appropriateness of the population structure that we've defined and evaluate the adequacy and the appropriateness of the data that we've used. Evaluate the estimates of bycatch sturgeon and the methods that we use to develop them. Evaluate the methods and the models that we use to develop population estimates and the biological reference points, including sort of a bunch of lists of justification and sensitivity analyses and things like that. Evaluate the methods that we use to characterize uncertainty and ensure that the implications of the uncertainty are clearly stated. Evaluate the recommended estimates of biomass and abundance where available, as well as the choice of reference points, and if appropriate, possibly recommend changes or specify alternative methods if they're not satisfied with what we've done. Evaluate the stock status determination and/or recommend changes if necessary. And then review the research recommendations and provide additional information that's prioritized for our use. So.
Thank you very much, Katie. It's a large undertaking you got going on there, and looking forward to seeing the assessment results, as I'm sure most of the board members are. We'll start off with Bill Adler. Questions?
Yes, we're moving through this this whole stock assessment and everything, and where does this play into where the federal government has declared it an endangered species? So, I mean, we go through this stuff, we do all this stuff. Does that mean that we can't do anything anyway because of the status, the federal status? I don't know where that plays in.
I mean, on the assessment side, we are not at all affected by the ESA listing. It's going to be, we're not doing any new research that would require us to touch the fish in any way. This is based on existing data, and I think as we've laid out the objective is not to engage with the listing determination in terms of, we're not going to come out at the end and say this was warranted or not warranted. We're going to come out with our best interpretation of current stock status, and then we hand that to you as a management board to decide how you want to interact with the ESA listing from there on. So if you feel, after you've read our stock assessment, that the listing is not warranted or it is warranted, or however you guys feel about the results of the stock assessment, that's up to you where you want to take the next steps going forward in interacting with the government on this particular issue.
Dave?
Thanks. Yeah, my question's quite related. So I wondered how the terms of reference and all mapped to the ESA needs and what the protected resources division, protected species division would need to evaluate progress, what the goals might be. So how well coordinated is this with the needs for its ESA listing with respect to its listing?
We did not look at the Protected Resources Division requirements or needs for this process. We want to keep it as separate as possible from that, in part to protect or to continue to allow the involvement of our federal partners, who really could not be involved if this were if this were to explicitly engage with this listing determination. However, I think in terms of what we will be providing are similar to what the PRD is going to be looking for, whether it's better scientific advice that they can decide the listing was not warranted originally, or proof that we have met some kind of, I think ideally we would like to have some kind of biomass target or threshold that we could show where the population is relative to that. I think that's one of the goals. Whether we can deliver that remains to be seen. But I think certainly a stock assessment will cover a lot of the ground that PRD is looking for in that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Just from the agency's perspective, and it's a little difficult for me speaking for protected resources since I'm on the fish side, but in conversations that we had last year when they were preparing their biological opinion, they made it clear that the results of the stock assessment would be, one opportunity, one avenue is for when the commission receives the completed stock assessment to use that as the basis for a formal request to reconsider, which has its own process under the Endangered Species Act, where the agency would go through essentially like a listing determination process all over again with the new information that comes out of the stock assessment. Alternatively, depending on how clear-cut I think the results of the stock assessment may be relative to the endangered species listing, the agency may simply take that as input and initiate its own process.
Thanks. Rob?
That changed my my comment a little bit. So I was under the impression in Bill Adler's question, to add on to that, it was my understanding that after 5 years there would be it was automatically a review of the listing. And so, I was going to say to Bill that without an assessment, the information gap would be there, and it might be problematic once we get to that 5-year mark. But now maybe I'm hearing that the 5 years is just one of the options, and that perhaps things can happen before that, depending, of course, on what the assessment shows. And so I hope I'm on target there.
I think you are, Rob. Lewis?
Yeah, I was going to bring up similar concerns. We're spending a lot of money on this assessment. We're spending a lot of money developing an incidental take permit. We're also spending a lot of money on observer programs to monitor sturgeon. So I think the quicker we can get this through, the better. But I still want to continue to be on the record every sturgeon board meeting about my concern over a stock assessment and the Endangered Species Act. And one of the things I'm wondering about is having a TOR potentially for the reviewers to look at maybe some other species that we're under our management purview. If sturgeon come back at 8% and winter flounder are at 2%, what does that mean? That's a real concern of mine. And so we're going to be setting a precedent here to where an SPR value perhaps, or an F value, is the reason for or against an endangered species listing. And so I'm just very concerned about that and feel like that could come back to bite us. And I don't think we're going to get a clear answer from the service as to where it needs to be, and perhaps if there are other species of fish that have been listed as endangered that have stock assessments that have been done, or providing us with some more information from the reviewers, I think that's going to be important information for us to try to get from those folks for what I'm assuming, since we all oppose the listing, that we're going to be looking at that assessment in hopes that we'll be able to move as fast as we can to get them delisted and try to take some of this monetary burden off of us.
Thanks, Lewis. I think once the assessment's done, we have a lot of work in front of us, so let's see how it all shakes out. Dave?
Yeah, so again, my question is, trying to anticipate what what needs the Protected Resources Division would have to evaluate this. And without going outside the scope of a stock assessment, it occurs to me that one of the threats to the viability of this stock is recruitment and limitations there. And whether through the stock assessment we can address that. Do we have adequate emphasis on that component of it to do at least the best we can? Without getting into, without getting outside the scope of a stock assessment, do we have the right terms of reference to address those anticipated questions? Are we getting any recruitment? It's not about fishing potentially; it's about lack of reproductive success.
I think that would certainly be covered under our try to develop models to estimate population parameters, which would include abundance and recruitment, and trying to figure out and trying to analyze our available data in terms of what that's telling us about population structure.
If there's no other questions, I'll be looking for a motion to approve the terms of reference to move them forward. Lewis?
So moved.
Dave Simpson, second. No need to caucus. Can do this by consensus. Everybody agree? Is there any disagreement? Seeing none, approved. I will turn it over to Mike with the 2013 FMP review and state compliance. Got it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a FMP review of the 2012 fishery. So as we are all aware, there's a complete moratorium since 1997 for Atlantic sturgeon. The EEZ harvest was prohibited in '98, and it will remain in effect until stocks exhibit a minimum of 20 protected year classes of spawning females. So a little bit about bycatch, as this is reported in the compliance reports. In 2012, a total of 332 Atlantic sturgeon were reported as bycatch in various fisheries. That's a correction from what was in the original draft. And the majority of that occurred in the South Carolina Winyah Bay American Shad gillnet fishery. And I just wanted to mention some concern about there continues to be underreporting for the bycatch as the ESA listing has created issues, and also some of the states have had to end some of their voluntary logbook programs for bycatch reporting. In 2012, there were 18 Atlantic sturgeon carcasses reported in the Delaware estuary. These were all mortalities that are most likely the result of ship strikes, so that continues to be a source of mortality for the stock. So as I mentioned, we have the current status, but we are underway with a benchmark assessment as we just reviewed the terms of reference, and that is expected to be peer-reviewed in early 2015. The TC and Stock Assessment Subcommittee are working hard on that assessment and have been compiling data for the progress to continue in 2014. So just a quick habitat highlight. As we all know, restoration of historic spawning habitat is important, and I'd like to mention that on the Penobscot River in the state of Maine, 2 dams have been removed recently, restoring some historical spawning habitat for sturgeon and other anadromous fishes. So as part of compliance, states are required to submit information on the result of bycatch monitoring, any independent monitoring results, status of habitat, information on aquaculture, and the PRT finds that all states are in compliance with the FMP. And we just had a few recommendations, which was that states coordinate with the Commission regarding the progress of their incidental take permits under Section 10 of the ESA, that ongoing research is incorporated to the extent possible in the upcoming benchmark stock assessment to aid in the understanding of stock structure and status. And also the PRT notes that several of those logbook programs that were voluntary, that were helped report bycatch, have terminated. So we stress the importance of mandatory reporting requirements for sturgeon bycatch and other fisheries. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mike. That was nice and quick. Any questions for Mike? John?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mike, with one of your points there, I was just curious if you know how many states have already applied for their Section 10 permits?
Yeah, we just put together this list. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but there are a number of states that have applied, and we will be reaching out to them to continue to understand the progress on those incidental takes. And I can follow up with you on the list.
Nothing else? Looking for a motion to approve the review. Pat?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good report, Mike. Very concise, and here we are. Move the board approve the FMP overview as presented today, and state compliance. Do you want to include in that the recommendations and staff recommendations? Make it all one motion?
Yeah, I don't think that's needed at this time, Pat.
Okay, just the first part.
Okay, it was seconded by Lauren. Okay. Move to approve the FMP review as presented today and state compliance. Motion by Mr. Augustine, seconded by Mr. Lustig. Is there any dissent to this motion? Seeing none, approved unanimously. I will turn it over to the next item. I'll turn it over to Rob, if he hurries to his seat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would like to make a couple of nominations for the advisory panel, and I hope my friends in Pennsylvania are able to second this, of course. One would be Kelly Place from Virginia, and the second would be John Pedrick from Pennsylvania.
I second.
You okay with that, Joe? Or I need to read it? No, I'm great. Awesome. Any dissent to that motion? We'll consider that approved. Any other additional business to come before it? Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just in terms of the advisory panel nominations, I will have a couple at the next meeting. I understand it hasn't met in a while. And just for everyone's knowledge, if you don't know, Andy Canley, who's worked for the DEC for 33 years, retired last week. So that's the bad news, and we wish him well. The good news is that when I took him out to lunch last week, he asked if we would consider him for the advisory panel. I said, well, that could be a long shot, but I think we'd put his name in. So anyway, hopefully Andy will be back, and we also have Arnold Leo was interested in, so we'll have those nominations for the next meeting. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jim. I don't know what Andy could bring to the table on shad and river herring, but or sturgeon, sorry, or both. It's the bring striped bass into that also. Mike?
Yeah, Jim pretty much hit it spot on. The AP hasn't met in a long time, so I guess the board should consider from their states if they want to enhance membership for that moving forward, as we'll be meeting with them coming up in the next several years.
Anything else? Lauren? Leroy?
This is kind of outside the Sturgeon Board's business, but since everyone's here, I'd like to take this opportunity to make a presentation to our new chair, Lou Daniels. We want to just show appreciation for the leadership he's already shown, and though Pennsylvania, has, I believe, fewer species that the board manages in any other state, we do know that Lou is very concerned about the species that we have in Pennsylvania, and so as a token of our appreciation, we have a presentation if Lou would come up here.
I think he already ran to lunch, Leroy.
Where'd he go? I thought he was here.
We'll hunt him down.
I thought he was sitting over there. He was, just momentarily.
Well, in the meantime, is there anything else to come before the board?
I'll be glad to help accept it on the behalf of the chairman if you want.
Maybe we'll just wait till lunch.
So lunch is served. I guess this board's wrapping up. Russ, you're all done. And the next board's coast-wide, so we can save this important presentation, and except for Pennsylvania, but you're obviously more than welcome to sit at the table. So we'll save this important presentation until the beginning of the shark board, if that's okay with Mark. And lunch is served out in the hallway for commissioners, just normal deal outside there. Grab lunch. We'll probably get a break for half an hour or so and get everyone time to eat and regroup. And
We are adjourned.